This episode of the Dorking Out Show podcast is brought to you by Brondo, the Thirst Mutilator.
And the letter V, because you can't spell vote without V. No matter who you're going to vote for, you should blah, blah, blah. Come on, America. Do the right thing. We're all counting on you. After all, Canada can't take all of us.
Houston, flight is go.
Myla, let's go.
From Assignment X, Amalgamated Storytelling, and thesoniashow.com, it's The Dorking Out Show with Christopher Allen Smith and Sonia Mansfield. Welcome to episode 20 of Dorking Out, a podcast for people who like to dork out about stories and the stories in pop culture that we love. That means movies and TV, books and podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you find stories that interest you. This is the Doctor Strange is In edition. With me today is my co-host, professional writer and author of The Sonia Show, Sonia Mansfield.
Hey there.
Hello.
With me today is my co-host, Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and nerd author, Christopher Allen Smith. In this week's episode, we review Doctor Strange and talk about the state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Kirk Hamilton, editor-at-large at Kotaku. Then Chris reviews Hacksaw Ridge, and I say Chris reviews because I didn't see it, which brings up an interesting question. How do you separate an artist's troublesome actions from their work? All of that, plus our favorite headlines of the week.
But before we get rolling, we had a listener question that got us thinking. Marcus, this one's for you. Next week, we're going to have a segment where we answer all listener questions. So send us your questions, and we will do our level best, or at least our level effort, to answer them. Marcus already has his question in. What's your question? Tweet us at The Dorking Out Show, message us on Facebook at facebook.com/dorkingoutshow, or email us at dorkingoutshow@gmail.com. So without further prattling on with the show!
This segment of Dorking Out is brought to you by Regret. Did you accidentally hit reply all on a work email? You made fun of Stan and accounting in that email, didn't you? Then you need Regret. Topic 1. Doctor Strange and the semi-annual State of the Marvel Cinematic Universe address. Joining us to talk about Doctor Strange is Kirk Hamilton, editor-at-large at the gaming website Kotaku. I probably mispronounced that. I've known Kirk for almost a decade, and I know not only is he the smartest guy in the room when it comes to video games, but he's an excellent writer and a critic of all things pop culture, including TV and books and movies and music. So I'm really excited to have him on the show to talk about Doctor Strange, and I hope it's the first of many appearances. Thank you for joining us, Kirk.
Hey, Sonia, thank you for having me. That was probably the nicest intro I've ever been given on a podcast, to the point where the fact that my website is pronounced Kotaku is way, way down on my list of priorities for things to mention after that. I'm really happy to be here.
Cool. We're happy to have you. Don't worry about it, Sonia. It's only one of the biggest video gaming websites on the net.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no reason you should bother to pronounce it correctly.
Sorry.
I mean, in fairness, it is a terrible name, so I can't really hold it against you that you would pronounce it wrong.
I call it Kurtoku.
There we go. That would be an improvement.
See.
All right.
So, go ahead, Smith. What were you going to say?
No, nothing. No, I'm just busy stepping on what you're talking about. So.
Okay. Anyway, we're going to talk about Doctor Strange. We're not here to talk about how I can't pronounce things. So, Kirk, what did you think of Doctor Strange? Which just opened this weekend.
I liked it a lot. I thought it was a really fun movie. I didn't really know what to expect from it because I never read Doctor Strange comics and I don't know the character very well. Not that I know all the Marvel characters that well outside of the movies. I've read the comics, but I'm not a comic book expert. But I thought it was a really fun movie and sort of a refreshing movie for compared to some of the other Marvel movies in a few different ways.
I really liked it too, actually. I thought it was really entertaining and the visual effects were really cool and trippy. And I've never read the comic book, but I went with my husband, David, who had read the comic books, and he thinks that it's very in the spirit of the comic books, the way it looked. Did you see it in 3D?
Yes, I saw it in IMAX 3D, which was a sort of a last minute decision because I remember seeing The Force Awakens in IMAX 3D and actually regretting it afterward because I didn't really like the 3D in that movie and I was kind of distracted by it. And then I think I saw the movie again in theaters in regular, just 2D on a regular screen and was like, I kind of wish I'd watched this way the first time. And, there are whole websites now, right, that are dedicated to whether or not you should see a movie in 3D. And I did that, but when I was buying tickets, I looked at those sites and they said, yes, absolutely, see it in 3D. So I said, okay, fine. I'll pay $150 or whatever it costs to see an IMAX 3D movie. And went and saw it. And yeah, the 3D was rad. I thought I was really impressed with, obviously, anytime they go into the mirror world or any of the alternate dimensions, it was really cool looking. And it's interesting. Like it owed a lot of visual debt to Inception, which I think is a pretty common thing that people have said. Like it borrowed at least that sort of idea of a city folding in on itself from that movie. But I really liked the way, Inception is a really cool movie that I've warmed to over the years. Like the more times I've seen it, I didn't really like it the first time I saw it. It's such a cold movie and it's so heavy and the music is so heavy. And like when that is happening, and I think it's Paris is folding in on itself, it's so heavy. Where in this movie, it felt so playful and light and fast and just constantly like dizzying and disorienting. And I thought that was so cool. Like just to watch it all happen, which I haven't felt in a Marvel movie actually in a while.
I was afraid to see it in 3D. I was afraid it was going to make me throw up.
I actually went with my girlfriend who is back from a trip to Mexico and is not feeling super great because she ate some questionable food there. And we went, and the whole first part of the movie, I was thinking, oh God, she's going to have to leave because, the opening scene is this like wham bam scene with Tilda Swinton and the whole world goes completely upside down. And I was like, oh my God, I'm feeling a little bit thrown by this. And I am not dealing with, lingering food poisoning. I actually I write a lot about virtual reality at Kotaku, and a lot of covering virtual reality involves dealing with nausea because a lot of the new VR stuff is sort of not that well optimized. And there are some games where you start playing them and it's so immersive, but then things are moving in a way that doesn't match up with your inner ear. And next thing you know, you're feeling really nauseous. So this company had sent me a watch that you can wear to fight nausea. Have you ever heard of one of these watches?
No, I know that there's wristbands you can wear.
Huh.
But I didn't know there was
Yeah, that's what it is, basically. I mean, it looks like a watch, but it's a wristband. And it kind of so I haven't tested. I don't remember the brand, and I won't say it just because I can't endorse it because I don't know whether it actually worked. But I'm going to be trying it out in VR. But I had it with me, so I gave it to Emily, to my girlfriend, and I was like, "Here, just wear this. You're going to be fine." And
you're such a gentleman.
Okay. Yeah, I gave her my nausea band for Doctor Strange.
You are. That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, I'm a real prince.
So the movie reminded me a lot of Inception, the visual effects. It also kind of reminded me of The Matrix.
Yep.
Yeah.
It like a more playful, silly Matrix where everybody's dressed up in Game of Thrones cosplay, but they're also hacking through. Yeah, there were some really neat things. So are we spoiling this movie? We can just spoil the whole movie.
Now we are spoiling the movie. Here come the spoilers, people.
Okay, so I thought this movie was very clever at a lot of various points because something that I like all of the Marvel movies quite a bit, but something that I've found is that they all kind of climax in the same way. They all reach a huge battle and a bunch of awesome stuff happens and there's maybe some character stuff in there, but mostly it's just...
And someone's going to open a portal to another dimension.
Right, and everybody's going to fight a bunch of nameless goons, and especially Age of Ultron, I felt like was a big one for that, where there were just a whole bunch of nameless goons everywhere.
Right,
and that sort of, it's cool, it's fun to watch all of the superheroes fight a bunch of robots or things they can kill without us feeling weird about it. But what I really liked was that Doctor Strange actually dropped a lot of those conventions. Obviously, there weren't really a lot of nameless goons. There were just a few guys basically in every fight scene. There were only a couple of bad guys. And the spectacle wasn't derived from unbelievable devastation. It was derived from just amazing, creative, world-bending stuff. And I thought that was really cool, especially. And then I thought it was almost a little on the nose that the main set piece at the end involves the devastation of a city, that they rewind a bunch of devastation. And actually, really pointedly, I thought, don't show it. They arrive and Hong Kong has been destroyed. And then he rewinds it and we get to kind of watch Hong Kong get destroyed, but not really. Instead, we're watching Hong Kong become undestroyed as they fight through it, which was great. And then last thing that I thought was really neat was the showdown with, and I do not remember the name of the whatever darkness deity that they were fighting. But that showdown was, I thought, extremely clever, the way that he beat the final boss.
Yeah, it was so funny because it wasn't like what you've seen in all the other Marvel movies. It was, he really had to use his wit.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about, destruction. It was, he used his brain.
Mm-hmm. And it was cool because I've always liked the scene at the end. I think that there's a mirror between Stephen Strange and Tony Stark. They're very similar characters.
Absolutely. Even the same facial hair. Right.
He even finally does his Tony Stark cosplay. Actually, I thought he looked more like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, but he.
Oh wow, that's right.
With the little white,
absolutely,
his temples. But a similar arc to Tony Stark in kind of every Tony Stark, in every movie that he's been in, but in particular in the first Avengers, where Tony sort of is the one who sacrifices himself and flies through to another dimension and is willing to die to save the world, which is exactly what Stephen Strange did. It's just that like flying a nuke toward what was the name of toward the enemy fleet in the Avengers was cool and fine, but Stephen Strange doing basically consigning himself to this eternal loop of just getting killed over and over and over again because he knew that would save the world, I thought was a really cool way to show his character growth, and it was just a clever solution.
I thought so too. Smith, what did you think?
I liked it, but I had a lot of thoughts. One was I really liked it, but I like, part of this podcast that we're setting up is because, we talk about Marvel a lot, which I think is great because I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the biggest thing going in modern storytelling, but for a podcast that we, talk about ourselves, talking about stories, there could be a question like, why are you guys talking about Marvel so much when you have all of, the stories in humanity that you could be talking about? You guys keep coming back and back and back to this. For me, it's a storytelling experiment that we haven't really seen before in Hollywood. So part of me is almost like, as an old style film buff, just very interested in the show that they're putting on. In the last 8 years, they've launched 7 different franchises, which all connect, and this is in an era where studio notes and studio interference with movies makes it very difficult for two satisfying movies in a row to come out from any series that's going on. So it's, part of me is not even all you have to do is put a, Marvel Studios stamp on a movie and I'm going to go see it and check it out and see what's going on. But at the same time, I think what's interesting is Marvel has not yet, and I know we're probably going to get letters and tweets about this, I don't think Marvel has put together like a Mad Max Fury Road, Godfather, Pulp Fiction level, flat out classic for the ages. But the cumulative impact of making 14 either pretty good or really good movies is something that I don't think's ever been done in Hollywood history. In the space of 8 years, they've made as many good action movies, as many satisfying action movies as the James Bond series made in 50. Mm-hmm. So it's this kind of spectacular thing, but because of all that, because they've churned through all these different stories and all these different scenarios, for me, Doctor Strange was starting to kind of hit the limits of what they're doing. You can kind of see their different tricks and techniques. I'm not going to say wear thin, and I'm not going to say that this is, comic book movie fatigue or anything like that, but you can see that all of their heroes are pretty funny. They're usually the coolest guy in the room. They're usually, pretty well off, or they have the resources to live as though they're pretty well off. And no one really gets killed. There's for the good guys, actually, since we've spoiled it already, there's a death in this movie, but the emotional impact of deaths in movies, like if you go from the original Star Wars with Obi-Wan Kenobi, or there's a couple deaths in the James Bond series that are pretty emotional. But here, it's almost like they've kind of sanitized this style of storytelling just a click or two too much. So the enjoyment is almost always there, but the kind of level of drama and the level of impact for me is starting to slowly drift down, even though this movie was really funny, really inventive, really visually interesting. But it wasn't as satisfying as I kind of was expecting it to be, and I'm a little disoriented and a little perplexed on kind of how to process that.
What do you do in a world where you might not always love Marvel movies?
Well, that's the thing. It's because if this had been the first one to come out, this would have been like blow the doors off. This would have had the impact that Iron Man had. This would have been like, holy cow, a new sheriff's in town, and look at what they're doing. But because it's the 14th to come out,
right? It's just a variation on another, tried and true formula that's been working for them.
Right, which is, and Marvel, Kevin Feige and some of the other filmmakers in the Marvel stable have kind of talked about, well, we try really hard to make the movies different. Like Ant-Man's a heist movie, and Captain America Winter Soldier is a, psychological, political thriller. And then, yeah, kind of, but they all end with a superhero punching someone. And that didn't happen here, but I do think that the arc of Stephen Strange through this movie is, when he was going through that time loop and everything, it's really interesting, but that is kind of his version of punching his way through the final boss. That for me, and it could just be that it's the coming 6 months after Captain America: Civil War, which the more I think about it is my favorite Marvel movie because it kind of dodges a lot of this. Is that movie, as it went on, it kind of got big to a certain point, but then it got smaller and smaller and smaller and more emotionally intense as it went on, until it came to the point where it was just two old friends having an awful emotional fight that ends in this awful emotional place. So it was kind of shocking and different. And I wish that the kind of the daring or the willingness to push outside of the norms that they showed with Civil War was kind of more on display here. I mean, it would not surprise me at all, and I say this with all kinds of love, if they had grabbed the Iron Man script, pulled out, taken all the scene headings and used that as the skeleton and then just poured in Stephen Strange stuff here, because it felt very establish the character in one way, shake them up, let them claw their way back. They come back as a redeemed person. It's almost too paint by the numbers. But even as I say that, sorry for me rambling, even as I say that, I'm thinking there is a kind of aspect of Marvel that is very smart. And this is, as I'm saying this, I'm almost wondering if this is their genius. In technology, Apple, for years, Apple's been seen as a company that they rarely do anything first. But when they finally decide to pick up a technology, like touchscreens or whatever, and use it, they kind of do it in the best way and they make it the it thing. Microsoft made tablet computers 10 years before the iPad came out, but when Apple finally put the iPad out, it was night and day. People talk about tablets arriving with the iPad. And I'm wondering, like with the visuals that were used in Inception and some of the stuff from, The Matrix that we talked about and all that stuff, is they kind of watch movies and then kind of pluck out the coolest thing of the last 10 years and then figure out a way to incorporate it into their films. And
I can't think, but in the other Marvel movies, I don't recall like walking out thinking the special effects were amazing in those movies. Like this one, like the visual effects are really, really great.
I mean,
that's the thing everyone's going to talk about this movie. I don't recall walking out of, any of the Iron Man movies or Civil War and thinking, well, the visual effects were great.
Yeah.
I would think that a lot of those creative decisions are on the director. I don't think that Marvel really dictates the visual aesthetic or style of a movie. I mean, Doctor Strange sort of demands that kind of thing.
Right.
It's interesting, so Chris, what you were saying about Civil War is I hear what you're saying about Doctor Strange, but I feel like and I totally agree that we're watching a new experiment in storytelling on a lot of levels. And Captain America Civil War was a fascinating movie to me and really satisfying and interesting because of exactly what you described. Like that was a movie that felt to me like Marvel making a pivot. It felt like them saying, okay, we've established this sort of Gen 1 of the Avengers and all of these heroes, and what are we going to do? And it was such a smart move to say, it wasn't about Thanos and it wasn't about some Kree army invading from outer space. It was about the characters themselves self-destructing. And even that movie itself had these sly fake outs, like similar to the thing in Doctor Strange where they destroyed a city. Mm-hmm. First off, obviously the premise of Civil War is that they're in trouble for blowing up too many cities, but also the fact that there's that fake out, that narrative fake out in Civil War where you think he's going to go activate this army of Winter Soldiers.
Right.
And you think, oh, okay, so they're going to go have this big fight with a bunch of super soldiers and it's going to be Captain America and the Winter Soldier versus these other guys and there'll be a big fight. And then instead it totally never happens and he killed them all and he's like, are you kidding? I don't want any more of you. I just wanted to lure you here. And that to me, I don't see Doctor Strange as being the next movie after Civil War. I see Doctor Strange as being its own origin story for a new hero. And I don't really judge them on the same sort of timeline. I'm really interested to see what comes after Civil War for the more unified universe, like what Stephen Strange does next, But this was his origin story, so I kind of judge it as an origin story where they kind of have to follow some of those, they have to introduce him, they have to show how he gets his powers. That's sort of what an origin story does, which I agree is restrictive. And it does feel like, okay, I've watched how many freaking origins, like between the Netflix shows and the Marvel movies, how many of these have I watched? There's definitely that feeling. And my other thought on that is, I was thinking a lot about Dread, just not really related to this movie, but because someone was tweeting about it. I don't know, one of my friends was watching it. Have you both watched Dread or talked about Dread on the show?
No, we haven't.
Oh, wow. Okay. Have either of you seen it?
See, here's the thing is I feel bad, and maybe I'm going to lose a little bit of my action movie cred here, is I've heard it's so great, it's all this great. And then I started to watch it, and it's like, all right, this is good, but I'm not, like, flipped out by it. So I stopped watching it, and it could just be, as a child of the 80s, I'm tired of drug stories, like where the drug kingpin is doing a bunch of stuff. But having said all that, I'm sure there are a million people out there, well, hopefully a million people, turning off their podcast players right now because they just can't stand what I'm saying.
Well, okay, fair enough. As someone who has actually seen all of Dread, that movie is really cool, and I think a lot of that movie. And it's basically Die Hard, but with Judge Dredd instead of John McClane. It uses the Die Hard structure, which is fine. It's like the Raid Redemption. It borrows a lot from that, even though I think it maybe came out before that, so borrows isn't even fair. I remember some commenters getting shirty about that. Anyway, my only real point with Dredd is that movie is essentially an origin story. It's I think the only real Dredd movie in that continuity. I know there was the Stallone one, but that was like a separate continuity. So it acts as it's an origin story, but it's totally not. It just starts and he's already Judge Dredd, and there's no explanation, and then they just throw them into this building, and the whole rest of the movie is this gauntlet of them trying to get to the top of the building, and it's designed really well, and it uses its structure really well. And it's an example of, oh, hey, you can do the first movie about a superhero, and it doesn't have to do all the things that I think, Chris, you're talking about with that Doctor Strange did, where we introduce the guy, and he's like really arrogant, and then something happens, then he gets his powers, then he learns to be better, and then he masters his powers, and then there's a big fight. Like, it doesn't have to follow that. You can do something more creative with that.
You know what? I think that's what you're saying, and this could definitely be Marvel in a situation where they're a victim of their own success. Because they've shown an unbelievable mastery in managing a story throughout so many movies. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe, maybe they've kind of gotten us to the point where we're expecting so much that it's just kind of not fair for any one new movie that they're putting out to bear the weight of all that expectation. But then the other thing is, as you say that, I'm thinking, man, if they had taken that approach where he's, Stephen Strange is already Doctor Strange in the first 5 minutes of this movie, and then they have a couple flashbacks to fill stuff in, or they kind of did this.
Or they even don't. Like, Dredd didn't even have any flashbacks.
Exactly. That's the thing.
I mean, granted, maybe Doctor Strange isn't the character to do this with. I mean, it's a pretty out there premise, and there's a lot to take in. Like, maybe there's a different hero that would work better with. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
It could have been. Or they could have. This is going to sound awful, I'm sure, to all the Doctor Strange fans out there. But, they did this kind of successfully with Black Panther in Civil War. He's just there. He gives a 5-minute speech about where he came from, and the rest of the time he's Black Panther, and he goes. But what I was going to say is maybe
I think Kirk's right, though. I think Doctor Strange is really complicated, and there's a lot there, and I think that I still don't think I understand the rules of what he can do.
Well, that's the thing, and I'm almost wondering if what they could have done is have Stephen Strange have to train some junior sorcerer. So he's kind of the one, because we never really have, like in Star Wars, the teacher is always teaching the hero. We never really have the story where the hero is the teacher that's already a super badass.
Do you know one comic book story movie where the hero is the one training somebody?
See, here's the thing.
It's Dredd.
Oh, that's right.
I'm going to watch Dredd
and he explains the way things work.
Fine, I'll watch Dredd. Damn, Kirk.
That was really my secret goal of coming on this podcast, was to get you both to watch Dredd, because it's a really good movie.
It's totally worked on me.
Nice, good.
Now I'm just resentful. Maybe I'll never see Dredd
damn it, this movie isn't even that good. Whatever that good is what he's talking about.
That's right. The bar you are setting here, Kirk, is very high. So I
actually don't think Doctor Strange changes that much from the beginning of the movie to the end. Do you guys think he does?
I didn't buy his transformation entirely. I mean, his facial hair changes, but yeah, I like Benedict Cumberbatch a lot.
He's a totally different guy. He changed his facial hair.
Yeah, it's funny because he got evil guy facial hair by the end, but he became a good guy. Right. I thought the training, I mean, any movie like this has to have those changes. I bought Robert Downey Jr.'s change in the first Iron Man way more, just because there are aspects of the Doctor Strange universe where he was just reading the books by the end, by the end of the training montage, where I'm saying, dude, I think it would take you a decade to learn how to do that, even as smart as you are. And there was this feeling that it was all very accelerated. And of course, he becomes a good guy and whatever, stops being a jerk to Rachel McAdams and all that, and that's fine. And I kind of went with it, but it definitely felt a little bit rushed to me.
Because at the beginning, it's like, I'm a doctor and I've got a big ego, and he's kind of like, he's Dr. House. He's Hugh Laurie's Dr. House. He's got really the British American accent. And then at the end of the movie, he's got a big ego, but now he's a powerful sorcerer.
Right. It's like, I'm sure his ego is huge now. He can bend time and open portals into new dimensions.
That's the thing, is I don't think that he's changed at all. What I think he's done, and this one's for all you nurses out there that are listening that know what I'm about to say is, I don't know how many surgeons you guys have met. Every surgeon I've met or kind of had interaction with people that work with surgeons, they have the biggest egos. They're some of the biggest smug bastards out there. So I would almost say that
they're all like Alec Baldwin in that movie Malice.
That's right.
I am God.
Well, that's exactly my point, is that it's not so much that Doctor Strange has changed. It's that he's realized, hey, you know what? I'm bigger than just save, because he talks about one point, I can save thousands of people. But now,
right.
With my work, I don't need to save one or two people to get drunk and shoot themselves in a emergency room. My research will save thousands of people. Now he's got the responsibility to save billions.
The whole world.
So in a way, that now his task has risen up to the level of his ego.
Right.
So he's probably just happy and satisfied.
Right. And it doesn't there's like a cool metaphorical thing with Tony Stark that I always liked, where his heart gets pierced and he has to invent a way to save his own heart. And I think it's a little heavy-handed, but I've also always sort of liked it, that was the thing, that his intense vulnerability is what taught him to respect life and his own place in it. And yeah, Stephen Strange, at least in this movie, doesn't really have an equivalent. Speaking of nurses, did you know I've been reading the internet, which is always a mistake, and I didn't know about Night Nurse. Do you know about Night Nurse?
I read about that too.
Night Nurse is...
that would make sense to me, because I'm like, poor Rachel McAdams in the thankless concerned girl,
who is so great, and you would think.
All right, so wait, hold on. What's Night Nurse? Fill me in here.
Well, so Night Nurse, and this is my understanding. Sorry to any extreme comics experts listening. I am not a super expert. This is just what I read on the internet. Night Nurse is a character who is a sort of, not exactly a superhero, but becomes a sort of a nurse who helps superheroes, and knew Doctor Strange and is connected to him, and then goes in turns up in several different Marvel timelines and storylines as a nurse who makes it her job to go help superheroes. Now, what's funny is, if you've watched the Netflix Marvel shows, it's Claire Temple,
right?
The character on those shows is basically that. And then apparently there was somebody asked, is Claire Temple Night Nurse? Is she going to become Night Nurse? Because especially after she turned up on Luke Cage, she's basically become medical practitioner to superheroes in Hell's Kitchen. And the answer was no, she won't be Night Nurse, because apparently there's some chance the movies might have Night Nurse, which then has led people to believe that Rachel McAdams is a character, because I don't think that the Netflix shows in the cinematic universe are going to cross over. I think they're separate. And so people came to believe that Rachel McAdams will be Night Nurse, possibly.
Well, it would certainly explain casting someone as great as
her.
To play the role of concerned girlfriend.
Yeah.
It'll be like the Iron Man thing, where finally by the third movie, what's her name? Gwyneth Paltrow gets some superpowers and gets to do some awkward stuff, and then I think leaves those movies forever.
That's right. And then we haven't seen her since.
Yeah.
Or Natalie Portman in Thor.
I've been thinking about some of the unprecedented things that the Marvel Universe does, and there's a really cool video that I'm sort of cribbing this idea from that I'll recommend to listeners. There's a guy who goes by Movie Bob Chipman, who's a very good YouTube movie critic, and he does a series called Really That Good. And what they're these very long, like 45, 50-minute videos where he looks at a kind of popular movie from the last 10 or 15 years and asks, is it really that good? Is it just successful because, the people wanted to go see it, or is it actually a good movie? And he does one about the Avengers. That's a really cool look at it, because he talks about how the Avengers was the first movie that brought all these other movies together. And it was the first time that the sort of shared continuity megaverse that they've been created really had its first test. And Chris, you were talking about kind of make or break moments. I feel like not Age of Ultron, the Infinity War is going to be the next make or break test. There really hasn't been one like that since the Avengers, because it was kind of this test of this. It's this storytelling. Like, we were just talking about Night Nurse.
Right.
And I know about Night Nurse because I read about it on the internet. And that makes it possible for things like that to be buried in these movies. And for us to have like comic book level extreme nerd continuity happening, where then ordinary people, and I'm a pretty big nerd, but people who are less big nerds than me even can go read about this stuff and understand what's going on. And they can Google, what did that scene at the end of the credits of Age of Ultron? What did that mean? Who was that guy? And then they have people explain it to them, and everyone can know this stuff. And the fact that they're making these movies that leverages that to tell this huge interconnected story, because they have the internet now, and they have Wikipedia, and they have people who are experts at this stuff who are happy to share the information in a way that didn't used to exist, is really wild. And that, I'm curious how big it can get. Like, when it's at some point, it's got to just get too big, because that's what happened to comics, right? Is they just got too big. They became so convoluted. They had to reboot everything a million times. And now it's kind of a mess getting into it. And, people die and come back and everything gets rebooted. And at some point, the movies have to do that too, or probably will.
Well,
but I'm curious.
I'm curious too. And it's funny you should say that, because I saw a headline somewhere this weekend. I can't remember where it was, where they were asking when Marvel is going to get so big that it starts to have some of the drawbacks of a long-running TV series. And they were talking about it in the context of Lost, where there's on tvtropes.com, there's a concept that they wrote up called continuity lockout, which is, in order for you to understand the story that you're watching, you have to understand 20 other stories that you haven't seen yet. And if you haven't seen,
and this is, that's a thing in video games too.
Exactly.
Definitely a huge problem in video games.
Right. It's if you're not up to date, don't even bother with this latest one. And that could kind of cut against my discussion of what they should have done, or my hopes for what they should have done with, Doctor Strange, because Doctor Strange is a perfect way to just jump right on. Here's this normal guy. He goes from normal to, Sorcerer Supreme. Everybody can watch that movie not having seen anything else, and it's still good. But I'm wondering, and one of the things they were saying in there is, Civil War, when they wrote the script to Civil War, they didn't even bother trying to bring non-fans up to speed. This is one for people who have seen all the other Marvel movies.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm wondering, that's a good question, is how much longer can they go before you have to know a bunch of other stuff? This happened in, it always irritates me a little, but not really, as an old style Star Trek fan, when they talk about, Marvel is first, world continuity from this to that to this. No. Star Trek was having crossovers from The Next Generation to Deep Space Nine to Voyager. It was all connected.
It's a dork. Star Trek did it.
Star Trek did do it.
Star Trek did it, except that if you watch the Star Trek movies in order, there are nowhere near as many of them, and they're not as connected. That's true.
Yeah, that is definitely true.
There are a lot of reboots and recasts and stuff in between. That is definitely true that they did a lot of the same thing.
Yeah, but I'm wondering how, one, how much longer they can go, and two, well, actually, let me step back and go in a different direction. One of the things I had heard before this movie came out that I didn't credit a lot with it is there's these rumors, everybody knows who's really into this, is that, Marvel sold off a lot of its properties like 15 years ago, or 20 years ago now, when it was kind of in bankruptcy, and that's how they lost X-Men, Spider-Man, and all this stuff. And for the last 20 years, and definitely for the last 8 years, they've been trying to pull it all back together. And there's been rumors for the last year or two, especially since Spider-Man came back into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that 20th Century Fox was looking for a way to kind of bring their properties back in. And I had heard that essentially Doctor Strange was the perfect vehicle for that, because he can go between these different dimensions, go between all these infinite different Earths, and it would be completely... it would not surprise me if there was some weird Easter egg that somebody hasn't found yet, where there's a reference to the X-Men, or there's a reference to Fantastic Four, although I don't know why they do it.
It's interesting. It's possible. I mean, at the same time, my screening, they had an ad for Logan, the new Wolverine movie, that's going to be this R-rated thing, and Fox just made $1 bajillion on Deadpool, which has an X-Men tie-in. So there's this question that maybe Fox is like, I mean, I would love it if Fox gave creative control of the X-Men back Marvel Studios, just because they seem to be doing pretty competent work at the worst.
Right.
But it sucks. It doesn't suck that Deadpool was successful, because I liked that movie. But it does make me think, oh God, maybe they're going to think, no, we got to hang on to this. Like, this made money. And then if Logan is successful, they'll say, oh, we're going to make another X-Men movie and make another garbage X-Men movie. And we'll be stuck with bad X-Men movies forever, which would bum me out because I like the X-Men.
Well, you could be right, but that's the thing is, yes, Deadpool made a bunch of money, but then Deadpool 2 looks like something's going on there. They lost their director.
Unclear.
Unclear, that's true. But 2, the movie we have all skipped over in this discussion, X-Men Apocalypse.
Did you know that I haven't even seen that movie? That's how bad that movie is. I don't even think that's fair to say.
Either.
But,
that's right.
Right?
No.
I mean, Sonia, do you have any desire to see that movie?
No. My husband saw it though, and he's like, it's fine, I guess, which is not a ringing endorsement.
It's not a ringing David endorsement. No, I could see that.
That's right. I'm the guy that saw X-Men Apocalypse, but
nice,
did not.
Good job.
But did not see Dredd. Despite...
Hey man, I respect that you saw the less good movies, but you can speak to it now. Is it any good? It's not good, right?
It's an exceptionally mediocre movie. It's an aggressively mediocre movie. And later on in the show, we're going to be talking about a Mel Gibson movie, and actually he's made some comments on the Marvel Cinematic Universe and kind of what that means for modern filmmaking. But everything he said about, danger with no peril, violence with no blood, or, no real consequences of the violence. Everything he said that happened in X-Men Apocalypse turned up to 10. It's a very strange movie because hidden within the end of that movie, I think, is the biggest Apocalypse. Is the biggest murderous Holocaust that's ever been in any movie. But because we don't actually see the ground level impact of it, they kind of shrug it off, and Professor X and Magneto are still kind of friends at the end of it. When in reality it would be like, the next door neighbor of Adolf Eichmann being friends after World War II. It's like, oh my God, you did some massively horrible genocide. But, well, I guess now we're both living on 7th Street again.
You're still a good neighbor.
You're still a good neighbor.
It's that lack of consequence, right? I think
exactly.
It is a thing with these movies that, when it comes down to it, I understand why they do it and can kind of come up with my own consequences. But at the same time, the lack of consequences is a real problem. In Civil War, even, nobody died. And that was a little bit of an eyebrow raise for me, that nobody died in this huge throwdown that they had with one another.
Agreed.
And what's his name gets injured. Okay, but he's already got robot legs and it's the future and he'll be able to walk in the next movie.
Exactly.
And it's, the lack of consequence does sort of suck. And it is something that sort of, I don't know, I think we'll maybe see more of in more of the kind of off-brand or less mainstream R-rated comic book movies. We'll see a little bit more actual sense of the stuff that happens, because the sanitized version of the mass violence that happens in these movies, it's not like I need to see all the innocent civilians getting murdered. It's more that there's a lack of specificity and consequence to a lot of it that can be kind of dramatically problematic.
Yeah, and that is the thing that I liked about the end of Civil War is, one, Civil War was all predicated on this young African-American student that got killed. Or Tony Stark's arc in Civil War was all predicated on this one kid that got killed.
By the way, whose mother is played by the same actress who played Black Mariah on Luke Cage, which I only realized because I watched the first part of that movie the other day, and I was like, oh, hey, it's that same lady.
That's right.
Totally different character, I think. That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, so at least they're doing it, but, one with, and I'll bring this back around to my Doctor Strange comments here in a second. It's just very strange to see that level of violence.
Strange, you would say?
It is. To see that level of violence not get addressed or not be felt by the characters in the movie. We don't necessarily need to see it, but you would think if they had gone through something like that. But what I was going to say is, the reason I brought up 20th Century Fox in reference to Doctor Strange is from now on, all Fox or the Marvel Studios need to do to bring everything together is just have Stephen Strange the first 5 minutes of the movie show up at Avengers Tower and say, "Hey everybody, this crazy thing's gonna happen and we're all gonna die unless we go over and get these people, go to Universe 272 and pull out everybody there. What are you talking about?" And then, after 5 minutes of exposition, the X-Men and the Avengers are all working together to do whatever.
It is a good workaround for that kind of thing. It's funny talking about Tony Stark and Stephen Strange, and Tony Stark's motivation in Civil War. That's the thing that's sort of missing for me with Strange, I think, so Tony Stark has been remarkably consistent throughout every movie he's been in. All 3 Iron Man movies, both Avengers movies, and Civil War. So that's 6 movies. And he's driven by the same thing. He's driven by his guilt, right? Like, he's been guilty this entire time. And as a result, he has this need to protect the world. And so he keeps trying to do it. And he keeps trying to come up with these new ways to make everybody safe because he killed so many people and he has so much blood on his hands. Right. And then he made Ultron, which was the hugest up ever. And he totally screwed that one up and tried to make this robot AI that would save the world. And instead, all these people got killed. And that's the worst thing I think any of these superheroes has ever done, is what he and Banner did, and they made Ultron. And so then he's still trying to deal with that in Civil War. And he makes this kind of bad call to sign the Sokovia Accords. And that leads to Civil War happening. And we just continually, with his motivation, it never goes away. He's a very consistent character. And that's pretty cool across that many movies, that one guy is that believable and makes that many bad decisions for the same understandable reason in the end. And that was the kind of thing that really, I think maybe Captain America is a similarly interesting character in different ways. He's carried across the movies. But with Stephen Strange, I didn't really get a sense of that arc for him in this movie. It was a really I went with the arc because it was the arc I was expecting. Okay, yeah, he learns to be humble and gets better, but I didn't really see it. Yeah. It's just Benedict Cumberbatch is fun to watch, and he's a good actor.
Yeah, I was going to say this movie really depends on how much you like Benedict Cumberbatch. He does all the heavy lifting. And he has such a dry sense of humor, and he's such an interesting actor, and he's so fun to watch. Yeah. And he's never boring.
Yeah.
So
he can sell a lot of that on his own, and the writers don't have to give him that stuff to work with. Right.
Actually, you know what? That might be the thing that's not drawing me in, is he doesn't seem to change. It's he's a little bit, you know what? That's the thing. I'm not even sure I would say he's become more humble by the end. I would say, yes, he apologized to Rachel McAdams, but that's about it.
Okay, good for you, dude. You apologized to Rachel McAdams.
Exactly. Yeah, so exactly. That's the thing. He's still basically, Tony Stark's still cocky at the end of Iron Man, but he has gone through a change. And Stephen Strange, let's spoil it a little bit more. There's a mid-credit scene where he's basically kind of talking.
Grilling Thor.
He's grilling Thor, and then all right, what can I do to get you out of here? Because you're at the top of my list. People I don't want on Earth.
Right, he's above the most powerful Avenger by the end of the movie.
Exactly, and he's kind of pushing him around. But I agree with what you said about Tony Stark, and maybe that's kind of what I'm hoping for. Maybe I'm, spoil a little bit, is that you've seen Tony Stark's character evolve and evolve and evolve. And in every movie, he's had this spectacular heroism. But then in the next movie, he's dealing with the impact of it. And it's getting worse and worse. And, if you look at just his story arc throughout the movies, being Iron Man is slowly destroying him.
Right.
And
I'd say that the other character is Steve Rogers, I think, is the other character. Those are the two characters that if I look at everybody basically in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're the two characters, which it then made it really cool that they had them face off in that movie, because Steve Rogers also has undergone a more subtle and kind of complicated character growth, but has sort of gone from being patriotic guy who followed orders and believed in his country to through the events of his movies and watching Hydra take over S.H.I.E.L.D. and learning that S.H.I.E.L.D. was compromised and learning that he couldn't trust the people who gave him orders and going through all of these different things and becoming sort of his own man, learned and changed a lot. And then those two conflicting ideologies, came into conflict in one movie, which is really cool. I can't tell you an arc like that for any of the other characters, just at least off the top of my head.
No, I think you're right.
That have actually grown like that. And all of them haven't had as many movies, so it's also not really fair. I think those two guys have been in more movies than, the guy from Ant-Man, whatever his name is. Hasn't had his Paul Rudd has just kind of been charming and whatever.
Exactly. But, that's the thing is they set up his movie, so that's all he has to do. And that is one of the brilliant things, one of the Pixar-like things about the Marvel movies is they set up the movies so they get you excited to see the thing that they're going to deliver. And they don't promise you anything that they're not going to give you. So it's kind of fun. So is there anything else that we need to hit on this?
I was going to ask, I want to ask one more thing. What did you guys think about Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One?
I thought she was great. I don't have a lot of attachment to the comics. I was aware of the controversy over her casting a Celtic woman where there was an Asian man in the role. I read somewhere, and this is me quoting something that I read, was the director said that apparently part of the reason for that decision was that because the Chinese market is so important to them, I think the Ancient One is originally Tibetan, and they didn't want to have a Tibetan character in the movie because of, how that's a complicated thing to have in China. So they were worried about that. Right. So the director said that that's from him, not me, which I think is a really interesting reason to make that decision.
I read that he said in the comics, it's kind of an Asian stereotype. And he
might have said that as well. And I'm sure there are several reasons, right, that they made this decision. I was fine with it. I mean, the whole thing is so goofy. It's the same question as Iron Fist. Like, are we just taking a whole bunch of these Asian cultural symbols and just totally appropriating them? And totally. That is definitely happening in this movie, and that happens in Iron Fist. At the same time, I thought Tilda Swinton was rad in the movie. So the baseline is already it's so goofy and so ridiculous, and based on a time, it's like the electric Kool-Aid acid test and Timothy Leary and Be Here Now. It's like the 60s when they made this comic and everybody was obsessed with going to Tibet and like dropping LSD and getting outside of yourself. And this it's kind of comes from that. So it's already so goofy that if they recast somebody, cool. And if it had been somebody not good, then I would have been a little more bummed out by it. But Tilda Swinton is so cool and so fun to watch in every scene of every movie that she's in.
Yeah.
That I thought she was great. I thought she added a whole lot.
Yeah. I like that this movie that has all these special effects and everything's so big and she's so quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And she's so simple and she doesn't show a lot of. She's always awesome.
She is. That scene on the balcony right before she dies. Was great. And it was a really predictable scene, except she's so good, and they're both so good, and it was just fun to watch her. She's so otherworldly
in general.
Her presence is just incredible.
And I can understand why people would be upset, but I have to say, like, as a woman watching all of these movies, I was kind of excited that there was a woman in the movie who's not playing the concerned girlfriend role,
who's not the thankless, Pepper Potts, Rachel McAdams, night nurse.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
Right. So what would you give it on a scale of 1 to 10?
I don't know if you know this, but at Kotaku, we do not give review scores. So you're asking me to break editorial protocol.
This isn't Kotaku.
I can. I don't know. It's like a 7.5, maybe 8. I liked it. I don't. Is it? I know like a 7 is bad, but that's why we don't give those scores because the system is broken. 7 is not bad. 7 is like above average.
Actually, you know what?
Say 2.
Yeah. See, here we do 1 through 10, but you're completely right. Is a lot of times when people use a 1 through 10 scale, all of the scores end up between 5 and 10.
Well, because it's like the same as grading. Like
exactly.
We see it. It's because we grew up with grades. So 70% is a C, 60%
exactly.
is a D, and anything below 50 is failing. So what if we do? If we gave out of 4 stars, I would give it 3 stars.
Yeah,
which is not the same as a 6 out of 10 or whatever.
Yeah. And I would. It's funny.
5.
Sonia and I have a running situation on our show where we basically give every movie the same score, because I would give this movie.
I think we've only disagreed like one time.
That's right.
Oh, okay. What would you give this movie?
Yeah, I would give this a 6.5 or a 7. You know, for
I'd
me,
give it a 7 too.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I like the 10 scale is because there are movies where you don't really hate them and you don't really love them. And those are like perfect. And 5 is right there in the center. It's just.
That's what I gave Sully.
Meh. That's right. That is what you gave Sully.
I feel like the simpler and more binary the review system, the better. Like the systems that I like are it's good, it's fine, it's bad.
That's right. All right, that's good.
That would probably be my ideal. Because most things are fine, some things are really good, some things are bad, and that's the way to go. But over years we've done so many different ways of evaluating reviews. This could be a whole other podcast discussion. But my God.
Actually, we might have to bring you back.
That one sometime.
To talk about review scores. Oh God, kill me, please. Let's talk about movies or something.
We will kill you after we have you on to talk about review scores.
Great. Okay.
No, we could talk about Assassin's Creed movie. That would be a good one.
Oh my God, that would be fun. The Fassbender movie. When is that out? Is that out?
It's December.
It's pretty soon. Yeah, I think it's coming out soon. Okay, in December. Oh yeah. Lord.
So
I guess I will have to see that, won't I? It's like
you will.
You don't
exactly.
You don't sound excited about it. Do you know something that we don't, perhaps?
I know that it's a movie based on a video game, and that's usually enough.
Right.
We'll see. Maybe it'll be good. You never know. He's a good actor.
It could be, it could be a Super Mario Brothers situation.
I mean, I've played a lot of Assassin's Creed games, and I really love them, and I'm not really sure how you make a movie out of that, but I guess we'll see. That'll be interesting.
I guess we're all still waiting for the Pirates of the Caribbean of video games movies. The one
right,
it was supposed to suck.
Park, right.
That's right. It was supposed to be awful. It was made for all the wrong reasons, but at least the first one, a hell of a fun time.
So my theory on that, and I know we're out of time, but my theory on that is that movies that borrow video game mechanics do far better than movies that borrow video game storylines. So the Super Mario Brothers movie is bad, but a movie like Edge of Tomorrow, or Groundhog Day, which both borrow the idea of dying and starting again and playing a level over and over again, those movies are really cool. Video game mechanics.
Scott Pilgrim.
Yes, definitely. Scott Pilgrim also works. So video game mechanics can be very cool in movies. Video game storylines usually may be best left to video games.
Right. Cool.
Kirk, thank you so much for coming on. It was so fun.
Sonia, Chris, it was my pleasure.
This segment of the Dorking Out Show is brought to you by Confidence. Did you accidentally reply all on a work email? You made fun of Stan in accounting in that email. Well, now it's time to double down. You're going to see Stan in the break room at lunch. You're going to tell him you meant every word of it. And then you're going to tell him if he doesn't like it, he can pound sand. You need confidence. Topic 2. This weekend saw the return of Mel Gibson to the spotlight with his directing turn in the new Andrew Garfield movie, Hacksaw Ridge. Along with his return came a brittle appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and some other testy interviews where Gibson was asked about his 2007 meltdown and arrest for DUI, among other things. So that episode was replete with racist and anti-Semitic rants and drove Gibson into a kind of internal exile that he has only recently begun to climb out of. So the question arises, with his new movie coming out, where does the art of a person begin to stand alone from the artist that created it? In a culture that is seemingly soaked with outrage and offense and scandal and drama, where do we separate people that are truly horrible and dangerous and damaging from merely the focus of the internet's all-seeing outrage of the week? Can we take something from an artist who we see as flawed or even offensive in their outlook, but still enjoy or value the art that they create? So all those questions kind of arise from Hacksaw Ridge coming out this last weekend. Sonia didn't see it. I did. But that's only because, obviously, I am the more tolerant and open-minded of us.
Yeah, yes. Yes. Everyone says that about you. Everyone says that I'm really closed off and just horrible, and I'm just, a terrible person.
Well, you do live in San Francisco, Sonia. So the bubble effect.
That makes me the most tolerant and open-minded.
That will stand as my argument against what you just said. So Sonia, so you did not see Hacksaw Ridge, and
I did not.
When we did our fall movie preview, you kind of expressed some question about whether or not we were going to do it, and I kind of teasing you said, "Oh no, we're going to watch it. I'm going to make you watch it." But life intrudes. We had to do Doctor Strange this week. We only have so much time to see movies and stuff, as this is not our full-time job. But kind of talk to me about your thoughts on Hacksaw Ridge and your thoughts on Mel Gibson, and when you think about going to see this movie, kind of what goes through your head.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. I would only be seeing this movie because you want to talk about it on the show. Like, this is just not the kind of movie I would go see, to be honest. It looks like a super bummer. I don't really when I go to the movies, I usually go to have fun. I'm going on a date night with my husband, and Hacksaw Ridge is not exactly, screaming good time to me. Right. So it's not at the top of my list of things to see. I don't really like Mel Gibson. I know that, he's apparently apologized for the things he said, but I don't feel like they're very sincere. And I think he probably still just thinks the way he thinks. He's just not saying them out loud. And it is hard for me to separate what an artist does in their personal life from their work. I go through the same thing with Woody Allen. I haven't seen a Woody Allen movie in a really long time because I can't separate his personal life from his work.
Right. Now, what are your,
which is crazy because it's not, most artists are human beings, just like the rest of us. We've all done things we're not proud of.
Right.
But, what I do doesn't end up in the tabloids or on TMZ.
Right.
And all these, it's not like Jackson Pollock was an awesome man. Like he was pretty terrible, but I can still look at his paintings.
Right.
So I struggle with this.
Yeah. Well, for me, Woody Allen is a little bit easier in that his scandal happened to break at the moment when he stopped making really important movies.
Right. It's just an easy pick it's an easy thing, right? It's
exactly. He's like, it was like he was going through his George Lucas Phantom Menace period. Right. Where
it'd be like if Michael Bay did something really terrible and I'm like, well, I'm not going to see new Michael Bay movies. No. That'll show him.
That's right. But I do wonder, there does seem to be a kind of who's mad at you in when it comes to the people that we're gonna let back on the stage and the people we're gonna let off, because the Dixie Chicks kind of went through a huge after 9/11 they went through a huge battle after they said some things about former President George W. Bush overseas,
which seems downright quaint now, doesn't it?
That's the thing, is it does seem quaint, but at the time it was very offensive, and I guess
to other people, not to me.
Well, no, that's my question though.
Because I'm tolerant and open-minded.
That's right. You're tolerant and open-minded unless you're Mel Gibson, and then you think his apology is fake, and you don't really want to listen to it.
Right.
So. and I
think you should burn.
That's right. Well, I know that's not your thing. Is part of my fatigue with the outrage culture, and this is something we've listened to a lot, is the people that get quote unquote forgiven, or the people, some people generate a huge amount of animosity and a huge amount of outrage, but they are kind of lauded for it and almost seen as brave. And then others, and I am not putting Mel Gibson in this category, are offensive and horrible. Actually, maybe I am putting Mel Gibson in this category. They're offensive and horrible, and what they say has no redeeming quality, or they just happen to be goring the wrong horses. So they're seen as, they can never really come back. And
I think
wonder,
Hollywood has forgiven Mel Gibson, though.
but that's the thing is, I think he's partially coming back. But I'll admit, I was as someone who grew up on Mel Gibson movies and liked him as a on-screen persona. I watched him on Stephen Colbert, and he had apologized, but you could still kind of see some ego there, like almost like he was a little irritated that
Right.
people were still kind of talking about it, which I think, so I couldn't, it was a little hard to tell where the ego of the movie star ended and where the real human reaction to having to talk about something that happened 10 years ago all the time began. Part of me thinks about,
Well, I think.
Okay, keep
Go
going.
ahead. Sorry.
No,
No,
that's
I
okay.
was just going to say, like, if he had done these talk show rounds kind of shortly after it happened, he wouldn't still be talking about it 10 years from, like, but he didn't.
That's,
And now he's out there doing the rounds, so they're going to ask him.
yeah, no,
Remember
yeah.
when Hugh Grant got busted with
Yeah.
like a prostitute or whatever?
yeah,
That dude was on like the Tonight Show like a week later or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
And he apologized, and nobody thinks that about Hugh Grant anymore. Like, people
Right.
moved on pretty quick. I think if he had, apologized and made the rounds, people wouldn't even be talking about it anymore.
I do agree, and I do think that there is a problem with Mel Gibson, or at least when it comes to his views, is that from the way I see it, is he seemed to be going through a really tough time, and half of the stuff he said was just free-range anger, but the other half was truly offensive, truly awful things that I suspect he still does kind of believe.
Right.
He is still kind of there, and then the question becomes, well, if somebody does have, I think I'm finding this question really interesting lately because there was a time, like with Woody Allen, what Woody Allen did was very strange, very weird, and did border on kind of, child molestation in some ways. And there actually have been,
And there's allegations of that too.
Semi-serious allegations about real child molestation. So there's that. But nowadays, if somebody tweets something that's worded the wrong way, if somebody, says something, God knows if I ever get any kind of public spotlight on it and people go through and listen to these podcasts, what I'm going to have to answer for. I guess
I don't get outraged about stuff like that, but
yeah,
Mel Gibson said is disturbing and upsetting. And,
oh, definitely. Yeah.
And I have to say, like, maybe this would be more, maybe this would be a more difficult decision for me if he was making movies I wanted to see.
Yeah. What did you think of Braveheart?
It's like,
by the
I
way?
don't want to see The Passion of the Christ. I don't want to see any sequel he wants to make to that movie.
Right.
And, Hacksaw Ridge, it might be a really good movie. You're going to give us a review here soon, but it's just not the kind of movie I'm really super interested in anymore.
Yeah.
Like I said, because like it isn't our job to go see every movie. So it's hard to work up to get excited to go see a movie that I know is going to bum me out.
Yeah. No, that is that's a completely rational way of thinking about it. I don't know. I think it could be that I'm reacting to this way because I'll be honest, before we started this topic, I didn't go back and deeply research all the stuff that he said. I remember it. A lot of it was probably pretty crazy, but I didn't feel like soaking that again. And it could be that I am having a reaction to the outrage industry. On
Right.
on Twitter and on blogs and on certain kind of things that I'm getting tired of how mad I'm supposed to be at all these various people for,
Right.
and a lot of times
It gets to a point where you can't enjoy anything because you're like, okay, well, am I
Yeah.
allowed to like the show? I better go research every star who's on this show and find out if they've ever said anything terrible.
Well, exactly. And I don't know how many times I've heard, people freaking out about something and like, oh my God, did you hear what blah, blah, blah said? And then they'll send me a little clip or whatever. And it'll be like a 15 seconds where they seem to kind of start in the middle of a sentence and then end without fully completing a thought, but it sounds really bad. It's like, oh, wow, golly. But then you go back and listen to the whole thing or watch the whole interview, and, the person that pulled the clip was being exceedingly disingenuous. And you could see they were desperately trying to light a fire online to get clicks, to get attention, to get traffic. And I'm just, part of me, it's funny. When religion was kind of more in the public sphere than it is now, there are people that kind of wear their religion on their sleeve, but a lot of it used to be, all of the things that we think about when we think about public religion these days, but also kind of like being humble. That was a big thing. Forgiving people. When people atone or apologize, don't keep rubbing their face in it. Don't keep bringing it up. They've made amends. Let them off the mat. And I don't see that kind of in our culture that much these days. And I think maybe I'm just having a reaction to everybody seeming to take so much pleasure in other people's misery. Maybe it's I don't like the idea of Schadenfreude. It seems like Schadenfreude's become like a big thing in the last 10 or 15 years where we take pleasure in the pain of others. And I just think, it's sometimes a natural human reaction, but I think it's just so gross and so mean. And maybe I'm correcting too far. Maybe I'm being too forgiving to Mel Gibson. Maybe I'm, even though I don't think I'm being all that nice to him. But I don't know.
You paid to see his movie?
That's right. I did pay to see his movie.
That's pretty nice of you.
Well, yeah, but I could ask for my $7 back. That's not the. I don't think he's going to be missing me. So what do you think when it comes to outrage and when it comes to these things? How should we separate the artists that we still pay attention to and the ones that we put on a shelf and say, sorry, or put in a corner, say, sorry, you guys can't come out and play anymore?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess it depends. I mean, this is just going to be a different answer for everybody, right? Because what's offensive to me isn't necessarily going to be offensive to you, or
True.
Things like that. And I don't know. It really depends on the situation.
Yeah.
And it depends on, like I said, I feel like if he came out and really offered some sort of really heartfelt apology, and it seemed sincere,
right?
I would be like, oh, well, maybe he has learned something, or, and I would be fine with it. I still don't know if I'd go see this movie.
Yeah.
Because it's just not my type of movie. But, I don't know. Because there definitely are stars out there, artists who have done and said horrible things. And I still, watch their movies or TV shows or listen to their music or whatever.
Yeah, one of the ones that's kind of bubbling under the surface for me is Michael Richards. He went off on that racist tirade, and
but I'll still watch Seinfeld.
Well, that's the thing while he's still in the industry and seventh banana on a deep cable sitcom, his public persona from where he was and his reputation, where he, there was a time when he was thought of as one of the top 5 character actors in all of sitcom history. And when you think about the people on that list, it's amazing. And now, even though his body of work has not really changed, even though the things he did to earn that reputation has not changed, one horrible night wipes that all away. And I'm definitely thinking, you know what? This is what it is. Maybe this is what it is. He should definitely pay a price for that But should it be the death penalty? Should it be his career is finished and over? He's done because, unlike Mel Gibson, the week that happened, Michael Richards did go on a bunch of talk shows. He was on The Late Show with his friend Seinfeld and David Letterman, and he did seem like really apologetic, really abject, really wrecked. You could see that it was affecting him, and I'm sure part of that was, oh my God, please don't let my career die.
Right.
But a lot of it did seem genuine. And that's the thing is if a guy is going to go up on, we've seen this in a weird way with Trump. If a guy's going to go up on stage and really have those feelings in his heart, it's not like he's going to go on stage 100 times and it only pops out in this crazy outrage once, and then those other 99% of the times you would have no idea. Those other, if somebody's on stage that much, saying that many words, the way they phrase stuff is going to bubble out. The examples that they choose to take are going to bubble out. Their true feelings are going to bubble out one way or another. And Michael Richards, from what I've seen, isn't a guy that, deserves to, have the
It's
career death
It's
penalty.
interesting you brought up Trump. It makes me think that means 40% of our country probably thinks Mel Gibson's totally fine. They're going to go see his movies, and he doesn't need to apologize.
No, that is one of the things. And then I swear, listeners, we are not going to be talking about the election or politics all the time on this show, almost
really
ever.
not.
But no, there's definitely a case that can be made that 40% of the current Republican Party is problematic. I will just say.
That's polite.
Because that is one of the fascinating things about this election is because for years liberals have said, the old tropes are, Republicans are rich, racist, white guys that hate everybody, and Democrats are soft, foolish, want to give everybody money and whatever. And both of those things are ridiculous, but
Republicans aren't all rich.
Well, exactly. That's the thing. And for various reasons in various elections, you could see, there's indications on some sides that some of what's true, but you can never really know. Like, what percentage of that party lives up to those stereotypes? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Well, now we know. With the Republican Party, it's a good 35 to 40%.
Right.
But anyway.
And on that note, what did you think of Hacksaw Ridge?
On that note, it was good. It was, that is one of the things that I'm most interested about with Mel Gibson is because say what you want, there's a certain kind of actor, and I would put Kevin Costner in this, is they have an understanding of character, they have an understanding of story, so when they get into the director's chair, they're able to make a certain kind of very emotional, very affecting, very human and real story that kind of engages in a way that even some of the best directors can't quite pull off. My son and I watched Dances with Wolves last night, and my God, that movie is good.
I haven't seen it in a really long time.
See, that's the thing.
I remember really liking it.
See, I remember really liking it, and then after a couple years, it was kind of like, it was almost like super romantic for when it came to the Native Americans, and kind of overcorrected what Westerns had been doing, and just made them look all idealistic and nice.
Well, and people were just mad because it beat Goodfellas for Best Picture.
But I almost think it kind of deserved it because it's a deceptively nice movie. When you look at it, it really is nuanced, and it really hits on a million different human aspects that are not really, how many crime movies have we seen? But the things that are, the nuances that are hit in Dances with Wolves are not seen on screen a lot. But having said all that, back to Mel Gibson and Unforgiven, or Mel Gibson and Hacksaw Ridge. The first half of it, let me step back. Hacksaw Ridge is about the first and only conscientious objector, played by Andrew Garfield, to win a Medal of Honor. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and he refused to pick up a weapon while volunteering for the Army in World War II. He says he wants to be a medic, and they tried to make him fight, and he, got court-martialed, and it was this big thing. And then he goes over and lands on Okinawa in the final days of World War II. And this movie almost seemed like Mel Gibson's Unforgiven, in that when Clint Eastwood made Unforgiven, he was kind of commenting on a lot of the themes and a lot of the styles and issues brought up in his previous body of work. He had been in a lot of violent westerns and killed a lot of people, and it was almost like him contemplating all of that from an older age with more experience and kind of thinking, kind of re-examining what he had put out into the world in a very interesting way. And Mel Gibson's movies have been, like Braveheart and Apocalypto and, his Mad Max movies and various movies back in the 80s, very violent, very raw movies that kind of glamorize the violent aspects of some of those things. More than a few people have said he's some kind of masochist because he seems to suffer in his movies, or his characters suffer like crazy. That seems to be the thing that gets them going. Kind of the core of their character is engaged by the masochism and the suffering that they go through. And this movie kind of plays with that. It's almost, in the first half, Andrew Garfield, whose father is Hugo Weaving, kind of swears off violence in it. And this movie looks at World War II in a very unromantic way. Not from the perspective of we have it now after we've won and we've defeated the Nazis and we look back on it kind of with rose-colored glasses, but from the perspective of people who had just lived through World War I and saw this new European war staring them in the face, and they were really not ready to go because World War I had turned out to be a huge amount of pointless murder. And so when Andrew Garfield becomes a conscientious objector, it's a very real-world, practical decision that he makes coming from this very religious place. So, and the way that Mel Gibson deals with that is just really a lot more nuanced than you would expect, even though there are aspects of this movie that are very 1940s Hollywood superficial war movie, rah-rah war movie. It's really good. And then the second half of the movie, when he goes off to war and it becomes an hour and 10 minutes of gore at the same level of Saving Private Ryan's first 20 minutes, it's good, but it becomes not great. It's kind of the movie.
That sounds too much for me.
It is. And what's strange about it is there's a scene when so the first half is like, wow, this is really setting up to be great. This is really setting up to go somewhere interesting and nuanced and sophisticated and complex. It's a lot of times in, pacifist literature or pacifist movies, it's, the pacifist says, I'm not going to go to war, or I'm not going to fight, and they never really have to confront the reality of what that means when other people are going to fight in their place. They never really have to come face to face with somebody that does want to kill them. Usually somebody's beating them up, and then that's about it. But in this movie,
right,
Andrew Garfield, he goes there, and there's a moment when he is on the battlefield tending to a wounded soldier, and, a wave of Japanese soldiers are coming, and he's got to figure out, how do I survive? And how do I live through this? And if there becomes a very practical, how do you live with this kind of religious feeling in the real world, in a practical setting, when the niceties of war don't, array themselves around your outlook on the world. So it's good, but what I was going to say is there's a scene in the middle of this movie where he goes to boot camp. And it is the most stereotypical. It was like out of a 1943, 1944 war movie where he goes in and there's a private showing him around and, oh, this is Tex. And then the guy from Texas has like a lasso and he's lassoing other people. And this is Hollywood. And there's a guy who's like super handsome and he's doing pull-ups and he's super buff. And this is Smitty. And his name really is Smitty. And it's like, it just seemed like like a scene that we've seen a million times in a million movies.
Sounds so old-fashioned.
It does. It is weirdly old-fashioned. And so the second half of this movie is old-fashioned in a kind of way, but it's got hyper-modern special effects and a hyper-modern attitude towards gore, especially war gore. So it's very disorienting. But the saving grace is all this happened. The stuff that he did, and I'm not going to ruin it. You can go on Wikipedia if you don't want to go see the movie. It's amazing what he did, and I think it really is. It's an interesting movie to come from Mel Gibson because he's got this reputation a little bit like Clint Eastwood. Like he's conservative and he's cranky and he's old and he's, he maybe he likes violence too much. You get that idea from his movies. And examining a pacifist and what real pacifism means and having to live with pacifism in a world where not everybody is ready to live at that level yet is really interesting. It's a good movie, but some of the filmmaking neo 1945 style filmmaking is a little bit of a drawback.
Yeah. I don't see me seeing this movie in the theater. Like maybe it's one I would watch on Netflix someday, but I'm not 100% sure this movie's for me.
Yeah, it might not be. Well, let me ask you this. How many times
I don't want it. I don't want our listeners to think, oh, Sonia doesn't watch anything that's depressing or dark. It's quite the opposite. But I just can't bring myself to go to a theater and watch a movie like this one.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But when I'm home, like I watch the most depressing documentaries on Netflix. Trust me.
Oh, why do you do that? I don't do that.
I don't know why. I do. Dave, my husband will ask, like, David's like, what did you watch? And I'm like, I watched a documentary about sexual assault.
God.
Like the most depressing stuff ever.
Yeah, no, I think that is one drawback of this golden age of prestige television is that so much of it is so uncompromising now.
Yeah.
That sometimes you just want to sit down and watch Cheers. You just want to sit down and watch something that's good but isn't so aggressively authentic, quote unquote authentic,
or
dark or whatever. And I realize me saying that in the context of you talking about a sexual assault documentary might not be the best juxtaposition.
Well, no, that's something that is also very dark.
Yes. So, anyway, I would give Hacksaw Ridge a 7 out of 10. 7.5 out of 10. It's good. Parts of it hint at greatness, but I don't think it ever quite gets there. But its drawbacks are also very interesting.
I'm going to give it a 3.
All right. I'm not going to record that in the great book of Dorking Out, Sonia, because you have admitted not saying it. You can't do that.
3. It's a 3. It's time for our favorite headlines of the week, and I'm going to go first. My favorite headline of the week was Quentin Tarantino spoke at something called it was like an Adobe trade show. What's it called? Adobe Max. And my husband actually got to see it. It was very exciting. And while he was there, Quentin Tarantino confirmed his retirement rumors. 2 more films and he's out. So he says.
So what are these 2 more films? Do we know what they are yet?
So he said one of them is like a Bonnie and Clyde-esque like tale set in 1930s Australia. And then I don't know if his 2-movie rule includes this other thing that he's thinking about doing. I guess is more of a documentary or about movies of 1970.
Okay.
Which I would totally watch. I would be super into it.
Yeah, I would watch.
But actually he's saying it could be like a documentary, it could be a book, it could be like a 5-part podcast. He said, so it could be anything. But I'm like, what do you think? Do you think he's lying? Do you think he'll really retire? Because that's just 2 more movies and then he's done. I don't think he's done.
I think he's lying, but it's lying to himself.
Right.
I think he believes it right now, but I think in a very Stephen King, I'm going to retire from writing. Oh, wait, let me just write 25 more books.
Right.
Yeah, because I think, Stephen King said he was retiring, I think, 11/11/63. I could be wrong on this, but I think that was supposed to be his last book, and he's written several since then. No, I think he's telling himself this, but with a guy, the way that he generates ideas, I don't know how many movies I've heard him talk about, like a sequel to Pulp Fiction or a 3rd part of Bonnie and Clyde or a prequel to Pulp Fiction, or not
right.
Bonnie and Clyde, Kill Bill.
Right.
He's got more ideas than he's ever going to be able to do.
Right.
I don't think he's going to be able to not direct anymore. I think he
That's
might.
What I think.
I think he might step back. I think he might re-examine it or whatever. But I think a year into his quote-unquote retirement, he's not going to be able to hold on to himself.
Well, and it would just be such a shame. I mean, I don't know what his next 2 movies are, if they're good or not. But I mean, The Hateful Eight was really great.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a master class. It was so good. It would be such a bummer when somebody who's making really awesome movies, really interesting movies, really innovative movies and story to stop.
Yeah.
Would be a shame.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is now that we step back, every movie he's directed, except for maybe the Grindhouse movie, but that was kind of an experiment that we'll put off to the side. Every single major movie he's directed has been some kind of classic. It might not be the movie for you. It might not be something that you're really into, but they're all fantastic. They're
really good. Yeah, they're really good movies.
Yeah, they're all very, very good at, filmmaking at the highest level that it can be made. So to think of him not making any, to think of living another 20 years, 30 years, 40 years of my life, hopefully, without any more Quentin Tarantino movies is, oh, God, I don't even want to think about that.
That's depressing.
Yeah, it is. Ugh. So,
what's your favorite headline of the week, Smith?
My favorite headline brings together our 2 segments, as Mel Gibson says Marvel movies are violence without a conscience. He was and he said this a couple times in recent years. A while ago he went off on Batman versus Superman.
Didn't we all?
That's right, and how it was a bunch of violence without consequences. And now he's teeing off on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And he said in a recent interview to talk about the violence question, look at any Marvel movie. They're more violent than anything I've done, but in my movies, you give an S about the characters, which makes it matter more. That's all I'll say. Which I don't know if I would agree that those movies are more violent than his, because holy smokes, Hacksaw Ridge the last hour is violent. There are moments in Braveheart which are just unbelievably violent.
Yes.
But when it comes to that much violence without consequence, I think he might be onto something. And, it's something that we talked about with Kirk earlier is, in Captain America Civil War, there was, 10, 15 superheroes going at each other, but nobody gets killed. Nobody gets,
right.
It doesn't.
Well, they don't want to hurt each other. I think it's because they didn't want to.
That's true. But, how many, things happen all the time when people decide to have a fist fight or get violent in some way or go over the top in their, physical interactions. And that's where all unintended consequences flow from. To see a movie like Age of Ultron where the ending is a city being annihilated, but we don't really see any of the people that get killed. I think he's right a little bit. Is one of the things
you heard it here first, everyone. Smith thinks Mel Gibson is right.
See, this is one of those things taken out of context that
it'll be taken out of context. It's going to come back and haunt you.
But what I was going to say is when you look at the impact of violence in his movies, and they are very violent and they are very hard, he doesn't shirk away from the horror. And that is, one of the hallmarks of, a mature level of dealing with violence in film that, kind of came in the
Marvel movies just
70s
aren't
and 80s.
Those kind of movies. They're comic book movies.
That's true. But there does become a level where that much action, the way that I've always thought about it is there are action movies and then there are movies with violence. Action movies are, yes, there's guns and shooting and fistfights and whatever, but it's not about the cost of that. It's about the excitement of that kind of, like Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's about the choreography of the chase. It's about the, choreography of the gunfight or whatever, and the hero getting to do stuff. But after a while, having the hero go through that much violence and not really communicating what a violent life like that means, I think can be problematic. We were talking about with Kirk, there's one character, Tony Stark, where we get to see the toll of all of these violent encounters mounting up, and that is a very, interesting thing threaded throughout those movies. But for most of them, it's just Captain America punching the next guard at the next base that he's trying to break into, and after a while, that becomes a very strange interaction.
Yeah.
So.
But I'm more interested in seeing those Marvel movies than Mel Gibson movies.
Until Joss Whedon goes on his epic tirade against the Irish. And then we'll see Whedon's true colors. And then what are you going to say, Mansfield? Are you going to put him up on a shelf with Bill Cosby?
Maybe.
Well, no. See, no, because Bill Cosby actually committed crimes.
Yes.
That he's going to trial for. And for me, actually, I forgot to say this in an earlier thing. I think that's where the line is. Until you get arrested and start going into court because you're so awful, up until that point, you can apologize your way back if you really show it for me. But, once you go that far, I got nothing for you. So that is my moralizing. All right, you hear me, Hollywood? You're on notice. I've given you my rules. I've laid out my criteria. Now everybody do what I say.
I'm sure they will.
That's right.
They all listen.
That's right. So, Sonia Mansfield, do you have anything else you would like to say?
I'll just say goodbye.
Bye!
The Dorking Out Show is on Twitter at Dorking Out Show, where you can find Chris at Jet Jurgens and Sonia at The Sonia Show. You can read about Sonia's random adventures at thesoniashow.com and track the slow and creeping progress of Chris's novel and his other hijinks at jetjurgens.com. You can find out more about the Dorking Out Show at dorkingoutshow.com. While you're over there, you can support us by giving us a review on iTunes. We have a handy-dandy iTunes link to whisk you right back to 2007, where you can leave your review and 5-star rating in iTunes. We'd do it for your podcast. Want to dork out even more? Well, you can sign up for our newsletter, where you'll get all the headlines we use as fuel for the show. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening.